It was 2:17 in the morning when Darius Ellison pushed his maintenance cart onto the executive floor of Langford Dynamics. The building was silent except for the low hum of servers and the occasional creak of settling steel. He moved the way he always did, quietly, deliberately, like a man who had learned that being unseen was sometimes the safest way to survive. He stopped outside the corner office. The nameplate read, "Sophia Langford, Chief Executive Officer." The door was open just enough for a sliver of light to cut across the polished floor. Then he heard it, a soft, broken sound, not the sigh of someone working late, something wounded. Darius hesitated only a second before pushing the door wider. She stood in the middle of the room, back half turned to him, white blouse torn open at the shoulder, dark blood soaking the fabric and running in thin lines down her arm. Her hands shook violently as she tried to pull a clean shirt from the bottom drawer of her desk. Papers were scattered across the floor. A heavy leather chair lay on its side near the window. Her perfect posture, the one that commanded billion-dollar decisions, was gone. In its place was a woman trying not to fall apart. Their eyes met. For one long breath, neither of them moved. Darius stepped inside. He closed the door behind him with a soft click and turned the lock. He didn't speak. He simply walked past her into the private washroom, returned with a stack of clean towels and the first aid kit he had restocked only 3 nights earlier, and knelt in front of her. "Let me help you," he said quietly. Sophia Langford, the woman whose face graced magazine covers and whose name made investors lean in, looked at him like she was seeing a ghost. Tears mixed with the blood on her cheek. She didn't ask who he was. She didn't tell him to leave. She simply stood there, trembling, while this man in a Navy maintenance uniform began to clean the wound on her shoulder with hands that were surprisingly gentle. He worked in silence, pressing gauze, taping carefully, helping her into the fresh blouse without ever letting his eyes linger where they shouldn't. When he was finished, he folded the bloodied shirt neatly and set it aside instead of throwing it away. Only then did she speak, her voice raw. "They want to destroy me, and I don't know who I can trust anymore." Darius looked at her, this powerful woman reduced to fear in the one place she should have felt safest, and felt something shift inside his chest. He had spent 2 years moving through this building like a ghost so he could be home when his daughter woke up. He had kept his head down, his skills hidden, his past buried. But in that moment, staying invisible no longer felt like protection. It felt like cowardice.
2 years earlier, Darius Ellison had been a systems engineer with a corner office and a future that looked nothing like midnight floor polishing. He had designed secure architectures for Fortune 500 companies, solved problems most people never knew existed, and came home every evening to his wife, Lena. Then Zoe arrived. The delivery that should have been joy became the day everything broke. Lena never woke up. The doctors called it a rare complication. Darius called it the moment his entire world narrowed to the tiny crying bundle in his arms and the promise he made while still holding Lena's hand: "You will never wonder if your daddy chose work over you." He tried to keep the engineering job at first. The hours were brutal, 60, sometimes 70 a week, meetings that ran past Zoe's bedtime, business trips that meant missing her first steps, her first words. One night, he came home after 3 days away and found his daughter asleep on the babysitter's chest, her small face streaked with dried tears. Something inside him broke cleanly. He quit the next morning. The maintenance position at Langford Dynamics wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. Night shifts meant he could be the one who woke Zoe up, made her pancakes shaped like dinosaurs, walked her to the bus, and kissed the top of her head before she climbed aboard. It meant he was there when nightmares woke her at 3 a.m., and she needed someone to rub her back and whisper that monsters weren't real. It meant he could be both parents, even if one of them existed only in photographs on the mantel. What no one at Langford knew, what even Sophia Langford didn't know, was that Darius had never truly stopped being an engineer.
After Zoe fell asleep each evening, he would open an old laptop on the kitchen table, connect through layers of protection, and review the public issue logs and reported vulnerabilities at Langford Dynamics. When he spotted a critical flaw, a flaw in their authentication protocol, a backdoor in a recent update, a pattern that looked like someone testing the system's defenses, he would write the fix, strip away any identifying information, and send it anonymously to the general inbox that eventually reached Sophia's desk. Over 18 months, those quiet interventions had saved the company an estimated $4.7 million in prevented breaches, downtime, and emergency patches. In board meetings, executives spoke of their guardian angel in the system. They never once looked at the man emptying their trash cans 2 floors below. Darius never took credit. He never asked for a raise or a better title. He simply went home each morning, made breakfast for his daughter, and told himself that being present for Zoe mattered more than being recognized for anything else. But some nights, after Zoe was asleep, he would sit on the edge of his bed and feel the old hunger, the part of him that had once loved solving impossible problems. He would push it down. He had made his choice. Until the night he walked into Sophia Langford's office and saw her bleeding. Have you ever carried a part of yourself that the world never got to see because protecting the people you love felt more important than being known? What would it take for you to let that part breathe again? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments.
While Darius moved through the building unseen, Sophia Langford lived under a different kind of spotlight. She had built Langford Dynamics from a small cybersecurity startup into a company that now protected the data of governments and global corporations. At 38, she was the youngest black woman to helm a firm of its size in the industry. On paper, she had everything: respect, influence, a penthouse with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the city like it belonged to her. What the articles never mentioned was how lonely the top floor could be. Most nights, she stayed in the office long after everyone else had gone, not because she had to, but because going home meant walking into silence. No one waiting. No one to celebrate the small wins or sit with her through the hard ones. The board respected her when she delivered results. They questioned her the moment she didn't. And lately, one board member had been questioning her more than the rest. Reginald Harlan had been with the company since its early days. He smiled in public. In private, he pushed for aggressive partnerships with firms Sophia had quietly flagged as risky, companies with murky ownership structures and histories of data misuse. When she blocked the deals, Harlan began circulating quiet doubts about her leadership. Too cautious, too emotional. Perhaps it's time for fresh eyes at the top. Sophia felt the ground shifting beneath her, but she had no proof. Only instincts sharpened by years of fighting to be taken seriously in rooms that preferred she stay quiet. Then, the anonymous fixes started arriving. At first, she assumed they came from someone in IT who didn't want the credit, but the solutions were too elegant, too precise. Whoever was sending them understood the architecture of her systems better than most of her own engineers. She had tried tracing the emails. Nothing. It was as if the messages appeared from nowhere and vanished just as cleanly. She told herself it didn't matter who was helping. The company was safer because of it. What she didn't know was that the same man who had been quietly protecting her systems had also been watching her from a distance, emptying her wastebasket, restocking her coffee station, noticing the way her shoulders carried tension even when she thought no one was looking. The night of the attack, Harlan's pressure had reached a breaking point. A major partnership vote was scheduled for the end of the week. Sophia had made it clear she would vote against it. That afternoon, she received a plain envelope on her desk containing 3 photographs: her leaving the building, her entering her building, and one taken through her apartment window while she slept. No note, just the message. She stayed late that night, trying to decide whether to call the police or handle it herself the way she had handled every threat since she was 22 and starting a company no one believed in. She never got the chance to decide. The man who came for her moved fast. He wanted to scare her, not kill her. A warning, a message from people who needed her compliant. When he left, she locked the door, tried to stop the bleeding, and realized she had never felt more alone in her own empire. Until the maintenance man walked in.
Have you ever been the strong one for everyone else and wondered who would be strong for you?
Darius didn't sleep much after that night. He went home at dawn as usual, made Zoe's breakfast, walked her to the bus, and kissed her forehead. But his mind kept returning to the look in Sophia's eyes when she realized someone had come for her inside her own office. He told himself it wasn't his problem. He was a cleaner, a father, a man who had chosen simplicity for his daughter's sake. But the engineer in him wouldn't stay quiet. That evening, before his shift, he sat at the kitchen table with his old laptop. He pulled up the building's security logs, not the official ones, but the deeper layers most people didn't know how to access. He had helped design similar systems years ago. He knew where the real records lived. The footage from the executive floor that night had been corrupted, deliberately overwritten. But the overwrite wasn't perfect. A ghost of the original file remained in a fragmented sector. Darius spent 3 hours reconstructing it frame by frame. What he saw made his stomach tighten. The attacker had known exactly where the cameras were. He'd moved with the confidence of someone who had studied the building's layout. At one point, he paused outside Sophia's office and checked his phone, almost like he was confirming instructions. Darius saved the fragments. Then he began tracing other anomalies. Over the next week, he noticed patterns only someone who had spent months quietly mapping the company's digital infrastructure would catch. Someone had been testing access points in the system, probing for weaknesses in the exact areas Darius had anonymously patched months earlier. It wasn't random, it was targeted. And the digital fingerprints, while carefully hidden, carried subtle markers that pointed back to resources only a board-level executive could authorize. Darius didn't confront anyone. He simply started paying closer attention. He began taking slightly longer on the executive floor. He noticed which board members stayed late and who they met with in the glass conference room. He saw Harlan leave Sophia's office one afternoon looking satisfied in a way that made Darius's jaw clench. Sophia, meanwhile, had started leaving her office door a little wider on the nights Darius worked. She never said anything directly, but sometimes when he passed by with his cart, she would look up from her desk and offer the smallest nod. Not the nod of a CEO to staff, the nod of one person who had seen another person's quiet strength and was grateful for it. One night, she called him in. "I never thanked you properly," she said. Her voice was steadier than it had been that first night, but the shadows under her eyes had deepened. "You don't have to," Darius replied. "I know I don't, but I want to." She studied him for a moment. "You didn't ask questions. Most people would have." "Most people don't have a 6-year-old daughter waiting for them at home," he said simply. "Questions can wait when someone's bleeding." Sophia's expression softened in a way he hadn't seen before. Over the following days, Darius kept investigating in the only way he knew, quietly, thoroughly, without drawing attention. He found financial discrepancies in one of Harlan's pet projects. He traced a series of deleted emails that suggested someone had been feeding internal information to an outside party. He documented everything on a secure drive he kept hidden in his apartment behind Zoe's old baby photos. He still hadn't told Sophia what he was doing. He wasn't sure he ever would, but every time he saw her walking through the halls with that careful, composed mask back in place, he felt the same quiet certainty he felt when Zoe reached for his hand in a crowd. Some people were worth protecting, even if it meant risking the invisible life he had built. The pressure on Sophia intensified. Harlan called an emergency board session for the end of the week, claiming urgent governance concerns. Whispers reached her that he was gathering signatures for a vote of no confidence. The partnership deal she had blocked was suddenly being framed as a test of her leadership fitness. She began receiving more messages, anonymous this time, but clearly from the same source as the photographs. One arrived at her home. Another was slipped under her office door during the day. The message was always the same: "Step down, or next time we won't be so gentle." Darius watched it all from the edges. He had gathered enough evidence to know Harlan was behind the intimidation. What he couldn't yet prove was how deep the corruption ran, or whether other board members were involved.
If he went to Sophia too soon with incomplete information, he could make things worse. If he waited too long, she might be forced out, or worse. The conflict inside him grew heavier each night. Zoe started asking questions. "Daddy, why do you look so tired? Is the work hard?" He would smile and tell her everything was fine, then lie awake wondering what would happen to his daughter if Harlan's people discovered he was digging. One night, after putting Zoe to bed, Darius sat at the kitchen table staring at the evidence he had collected. Bank transfers, deleted access logs, a pattern of deleted security footage that only appeared on nights when Harlan stayed late. He realized he couldn't do this alone anymore. The next evening, after most of the building had emptied, he knocked softly on Sophia's open door. She looked up, surprised but not unwelcoming. "I need to show you something," he said. He didn't bring the laptop. He brought printed pages, carefully redacted, carefully organized. He laid them on her desk one by one and explained, in the calm voice of a man who once briefed executives for a living, what he had found. Sophia listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. "You're not just a maintenance man," she said, finally. It wasn't an accusation, it was understanding. "I used to be a systems engineer, before my daughter was born, before I decided being her father mattered more than titles." Sophia looked at the evidence again, then at him. "You've been the one sending the fixes." He nodded once. She stood and walked to the window, arms wrapped around herself. "I've spent years surrounded by people who smile to my face and undermine me the moment I turn around, and the one person who's actually been protecting this company has been emptying my trash can." Darius didn't know what to say to that. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" she asked, turning back to him. "Because I have a little girl who needs her father to come home every morning. Because I've already lost one person I loved. I wasn't ready to risk losing the life I built for her." Sophia stepped closer, close enough that he could see the faint scar on her shoulder where he had once cleaned her wound. "And now?" asked Sophia softly. Darius met her eyes. "Now I'm not sure I can keep pretending I don't see what's happening to you." The air between them changed, something fragile and real passing through it. The board meeting was scheduled for Friday at 10 a.m. Sophia walked into the glass-walled conference room wearing a charcoal suit and the same quiet strength she had carried since the night Darius found her bleeding. Harlan sat at the head of the table, already smiling like a man who had won. She let him speak first. He talked about vision, about bold moves, about how the company needed leadership willing to take risks. He never mentioned the threats. He never mentioned the evidence Darius had uncovered. When he finished, Sophia stood. "I'd like to introduce someone," she said. Darius walked in, wearing the same Navy maintenance uniform he had worn for 2 years. He carried a single folder. He didn't sit. He simply placed the folder on the table and began to speak in the same calm voice he used when tucking Zoe in at night. He laid out the evidence piece by piece, the deleted footage, the financial trails, the access logs that only someone with executive-level clearance could have manipulated. He explained how the random attack on Sophia had been coordinated, and how the same person had been feeding sensitive information to outside parties for months. The room grew very still. Harlan tried to bluster. He called it lies. He said a janitor had no business speaking in a boardroom. Darius looked at him without raising his voice. "I stopped being just a janitor the night I had to stop your man from hurting the woman who actually built this company." Sophia spoke then. She didn't raise her voice either. She simply said, "I move to remove Reginald Harlan from the board effective immediately, pending a full investigation by independent counsel." The vote was unanimous. Harlan was escorted out by security. The rest of the board sat in stunned silence. Afterwards, in Sophia's office, she closed the door and leaned against it for a moment. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I know, but some things are worth the risk."
She crossed the room and took his hand, the same hand that had once cleaned blood from her skin. "Thank you," she whispered, "for seeing me when I thought no one did." He didn't let go. In the weeks that followed, the family housing program received its extension and a new, smaller but steady stream of support. Elena personally ensured the immediate shortfall was covered. She did it quietly, the way Marcus had taught her, without ever saying a word. She kept her promise about the bench. Every Friday at sunset she arrived, sometimes with coffee, sometimes with nothing but her coat and the questions she was still learning how to ask. Marcus and Lily joined her more often than not. Lily began to bring drawings to leave on the bench for the next family who needs to sit here. Marcus never spoke again about the donations. Elena never asked him to. What changed was subtler. Elena began leaving her office earlier on some evenings. She started visiting the hospital family lounge without an agenda, simply to listen. The penthouse did not feel quite so large or so empty. She still ran the foundation. She still attended the galas when she had to, but the numbers on the spreadsheets no longer felt like the only language she spoke. Marcus continued teaching and coaching. The basketball team won 3 more games that season than they had the year before, not because they suddenly became champions, but because the boys had started believing that showing up mattered, even when the scoreboard disagreed. Lily asked fewer questions about heaven and more questions about whether they could bring Elena a drawing next time. One Friday, in late autumn, as the leaves turned the color of old pennies, Elena and Marcus sat on either side of Lily while she napped between them. The air was cold enough that their breaths showed. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Finally, Marcus said, very quietly, "Thank you for keeping the promise." Elena looked at the hospital lights and then at the small sleeping form between them. "Thank you," she answered, "for letting me sit." In a world that rewards the loudest voices and the brightest spotlights, the most enduring changes often begin in silence. A bench, a question, a hand moving gently through a child's hair while the sun goes down. 2 people who had nothing in common except a shared belief that families should not have to choose between love and survival. Marcus Reed never wanted to be known. Elena Voss had spent years being known by everyone except the people who mattered most. In finding each other on an ordinary bench, they each recovered something they had lost. He recovered the knowledge that his gifts had mattered, and she recovered the knowledge that her foundation still had a soul. The program continues. The donations continue, still anonymous. And on most Fridays, when the light begins to fade, there is still a bench where a billionaire and a single father sit in comfortable silence while a little girl sleeps between them. And the world, for a little while, feels exactly the right size. If you could have one conversation with someone who changed your life without ever knowing it, what would you want to say to them? If this story moved you, please tap the like button. It genuinely helps more people find these quiet stories of courage and connection. And if you believe, as I do, that the world still needs reminders of the hidden heroes walking among us every day, I would be honored if you subscribed and joined us for the next one. Thank you for watching all the way through. Take care of each other out there.